So hello fans of History Hunters. I'm driving to Newman, California. It's on the west side of Stanislaus County, and I'm here specifically to check out some historical graves of pioneers in the Hills Ferry Cemetery. Unfortunately, when I got here, I found out I had some microphone troubles. It seems to happen every time I'll travel away to a different place, but we're going to make do. I'm going to try to use all of this shoot on a cell phone. I'll talk to you about this cemetery. It's Hills Ferry Cemetery. It dates back to 1867, and there are approximately 11,000 graves out here. And there's a lot of historical people here affiliated with the early days of California. Whenever you have a cemetery this big, you got some murder victims. You also have people who suffered some unfortunate deaths. I chiefly wanted to come out here and pay my respects to a fellow historian. His name was Frank Latta. He was a Central Valley boy. He grew up here. He was born not too far from here. He was heavily interested in the Yolkut Indian tribes that populated in this area, and this particularly the Central Valley of California. It's a huge valley. If any of you have been through it, you know exactly how big it is. This extends all the way up to North California and all the way to Southern California. Frank Latta was also very interested in Western folklore. He became friends with Littleton Dalton, one of the Dalton brothers, one of the law-abiding Dalton brothers. He authored a book, and I've been reading it and was really fascinated by what he said. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of talking birds today. I think they're enjoying the sun after all the nasty weather that we've had. But let's go check out and see what we can find out here in the cemetery. So they're actually doing a lot of upkeep today. So they're mowing grass, and the birds in the trees are really loud. But this is the grave of a sheriff of Merced County, J. Leander or J.L. Denon. He was a native of Massachusetts. He was born April 18th, 1832. He died in Merced in 1886. And he was a member of the Hills Ferry Lodge of the Free and Accepted Masons. He's actually buried here with a number of their family members, including his wife, Anna Denon. She was born in 1842 and she died in 1914. And there's a bunch of their little children buried around here as well, including Hall, the only child of J.L. and Anna. He was only 5 months old. He was a native of Massachusetts. He was 54 when he died. He came to California in 1840, and he was a member of the California Pioneers. He served as a county supervisor, and in 1884, he was elected sheriff of Merced County as a Republican by a pretty large majority. Now, he was originally buried in the Cottonwood Cemetery in Gustine, and like a lot of the graves there, he was moved here to the Hills Ferry Cemetery. I think it's so cool that these little markings here on this marker have withstood the test of time. 1886, this was put into the stone. In life, he was beloved, and in death, sincerely mourned. So my eyes were immediately drawn to this grave. Actually, she was just shy of her 13th birthday. She was 12 years old. Minnie Elizabeth Matados, and there, look at that picture of her. And right up there, no doubt a family that was in grief, losing a beautiful little girl. I actually wanted to get away from the lawnmowers that are kicked up today and go out here to the west side of the cemetery, trying to get away from the noise. But then we've got the road noise on the other side of those cypress trees there. You'll find that there's a lot of Portuguese immigrants out here, and Lopes family here. Manuel, like he died in 1927. You have to really admire the artwork that went into these. I think for me, it's just seeing what I can see and just the interesting things that you find in a cemetery that maybe you never knew about. It kind of expands your horizons. So, I mean, if you're the type that doesn't like to go to the cemeteries because you are reminded of death, it's a reality. And, but why not enjoy it? I mean, if we have to suffer death, might as well enjoy it. That's the way I feel about it. That sounds sick. So right here in the Wentworth family plot are two graves that I wanted to highlight. One of Henry Wentworth, lived from 1824 to 1897. And he came to Tuolumne County, where he hauled provisions with an 8-mule team from Stockton to the stores and miners in Chinese camp and around that area. Later, he kept a provision store for the Walkerly brothers at Dutch Bar. So later, he was engaged in mining at Chinese camp, and then later at the Crimea House on Keystone Flat. We did a video on the Crimea House way a long time ago. Now, Mr. Wentworth and Ann Hall had become engaged to be married in England, and she made the trip to California early in 1855, and they met and they married. He took his bride back to the mines, where he continued until 1863. Then they moved up to Contra Costa County by team and wagon, taking 3 days for the journey. He farmed up there, and then he came down to Merced County in 1868. And he was basically a farmer the rest of his life. How much do you want to bet that Robert Butts was the butt of everyone's joke? That all ended in 1918. Now, I wanted to focus on this grave, George Denon. He died in 1887, not because of what he did in his life, which I didn't find out a whole lot about, but basically he died when he was stabbed in the throat. There was a newspaper article that was very graphic about his death. Newspapers don't report like this anymore, but it said he was suffering from the agony and strangulation produced by an inflammatory disease of the throat, and in order to obtain relief, somebody punctured his neck with the sharp blade of a small penknife, and unfortunately, the knife struck an artery, and he bled to death. He was 55 or 56 years old. I'm hoping that the guy did not stab himself in the throat. I can't imagine doing that.
Hills Ferry Cemetery has a full-time staff, so I asked for help looking up the locations of graves of various individuals. Unfortunately, some of the records are lacking and didn't show some of the individuals for which I was searching. Scott, who was the cemetery manager, volunteered to show me 2 graves which he thought I'd be interested in, since some other researchers have come to the cemetery hunting for them.
What's it say?
The condition of this grave was so badly worn that we both had trouble reading it. When I reviewed my video, I was able to make out the name of John Monroe Newsom. He was one of the very first county supervisors of Stanislaus County after it was formed in 1854. He also led me to the cremains of Mary Willine Williams, who ordered that her grave marker be engraved with the words teacher, pacifist, historian, and feminist. Williams was raised in a poor family in this county, which caused her to seek out a different path of higher education. She went to the San Jose Teachers College and taught for a while until she could study at Stanford University. In 1908, she became one of the first women to graduate from Stanford. After a year as an instructor of history at Wellesley College in Massachusetts, she was called to the Goucher College in Baltimore as a professor, where she remained until retirement in 1940. She specialized in Latin American history, and in 1918 and 19 helped Honduras resolve boundary issues with Guatemala and Nicaragua. Famed aviator Charles Lindbergh sought her out in 1928 while he planned for his tour of South America. She campaigned vigorously on behalf of peace and equal rights for women, and writing for both causes in magazines and newspapers.
You're probably wondering what is the big deal about Frank Latta. Well, he was a historian. He was the author of many books relating to the Yoka people and the history of the early settlements of the San Joaquin Valley. He was born not too far from here. As a young boy, he became interested in the stories of the early pioneers, and in 1906 he began interviewing some of them. He became a carpentry and a drafting teacher at the high schools in Gustine, Porterville, Shafter, and Bakersfield from about 1915 to 1945. But his real passion was documenting history, kind of like what I do. He published a large number of newspaper articles in the 1920s and 1930s. But in the early 1920s, he interviewed an interesting young man named Thomas Jefferson Mayfield, who he affectionately called as Uncle Jeff. He was the youngest son of a settler on the Curtin River from Texas, William Mayfield. Uncle Jeff grew up in a Yokutt village following the death of his mother. And Latta was prompted to write a book about Uncle Jeff's story, a tale of a San Joaquin Valley pioneer and his life with the Yokutt Indians in 1929. In 1936, he published a book describing the route and the history of the old Spanish Road and the settlements along it on the west side of the valley, stretching from Los Angeles to what is now Oakland. He also founded the Kern County Museum in Bakersfield in 1941, and he was curated there from 1945 to 56.
In 1978, Latta interviewed the grandson of the legendary bandit Joaquin Murrieta, Joaquin Tex Murrieta, and his son Marcos. In 1980, Latta wrote one of the best books on Murrieta as he interviewed men who rode with him, including the bandit's camp cook, who was 100 at the time of the interview.
So in 1956, Frank and his wife headed off to Pescadero, beautiful place off the coast, and he bought this huge ranch, the former Steel Ranch, and he intended to take all the things that he collected, the historical memorabilia, the Indian artifacts, and he was going to create this museum, historical village, and an authentic reproduction, that sounds funny, of an Indian village. And he went through all the proper county channels, and of course, he was shot down. This is California. You can't hardly do anything. But that surprises me. In 1956, to be shot down like that seems like a tragedy. This individual here is very interesting. It's Thomas Wesley Bradley, 1818 to 1902. He actually participated in the famous Bloodless Bear Flag Revolt in Sonoma, California. So basically, in a nutshell, from June to July 1846, there was a small group of about 30 American settlers in California that were rebelling against the Mexican government and proclaimed California as an independent republic. They invaded the largely defenseless Mexican outpost of Sonoma, where retired Mexican General Mariano Vallejo was arrested, even though he supported American annexation. But 23 days later, after the bear flag was raised, U.S. military troops began occupying California, which went on to join the Union in 1850. So that bear flag became the official state flag in 1911. Originally, the couple was buried in the Cottonwood Cemetery in Merced County, but they were moved in the 1920s as the cemetery was falling on hard times and there was a lack of close residence. So a lot of the bodies were moved over here. Sometimes all you need to do is visit a cemetery to see how brief life is. This young boy, Henry in Blackwell, he died in 1899. He was 16 years old. He died of scarlet fever. And next to him is his brother Charles Blackwell. It's like they died at the same time. I bet they both died of scarlet fever. Wow, within days, 2 days, 3 days apart. Wow. What a loss for any parent. So in talking to the staff here, I found out that they're doing quite a good job of updating records. But unfortunately, back in 1918, the record keeping here was not up to par. I was looking for an individual. His name was James Barnes Moran. He lived from 1859 to 1912. And his son was James Glenn Moran, who was the father of actress and sex symbol Dolores Moran. She's buried in the same cemetery as Marilyn Monroe. And we did discuss her in one of our videos that we did on that location. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to find it. Now, of course, he passed away. Grandfather passed away before Dolores was born. I think she was born in 1926 in Stockton. So, yeah, disappointed that I won't be able to show you that grave. That grave is supposed to be here, but a lot of the graves have been moved over from Cottonwood Cemetery. Who knows when. They widened the road and they brought a lot of the graves over here. And I understand that a lot of them were just placed here without markers. So who knows? It's not every day you find a Confederate grave out here on the west. 1827 to 1899 lived First Lieutenant Brutus Easton. He was Company B of the 2nd Missouri Infantry of the Confederate States of America. So a lot of residents of Stanislaus County will recognize this name, Fink, because there's a road named after us, and there's actually a landfill named after this road, which was named after the family, Fink Road Landfill. And I noticed here that Jacob Fink was born in Germany, 1817, and he died in 1896. It's like he was 78 years old, and his wife Rosanna is from the same town. She died in 1894. Very cool.
This is the grave of World War I veteran Frank Worthington, who was a saddler in the 17th Field Artillery, 2nd Division. He saw service both in France and the Army of Occupation for 1 year after the war. When he came back home, he led the life of a dairyman. He suddenly grew ill and died in 1943 at the age of 47.
So this is the grave of Andrew Ewing, 1818 to 1895, and the reason that I singled him out is because he came to California from Iowa, crossing the plains with an oxen team in 1852, and first landing in Stockton, where he stayed for a year, and then he went to Chinese camp in Tuolumne County and mined. His next move was to Contra Costa County, where his first daughter was born, and then he came to Merced County in 1868 and farmed grain. He actually served in the state legislature in the 1870s. Yeah, so this is one of the graves that I wanted to find. It's of Joseph G. Rose. He was a very young man when he died in World War II battle. He's the first World War II casualty buried here in this cemetery. He was a corporal in the 32nd Infantry of the 7th Infantry Division. He died in action on the Battle of Attu, May 29th, 1943. It was the only place in which the Japanese and the American forces were battling it out on snowy conditions. It got pretty brutal with some hand-to-hand combat. A lot of men died in this battle, and there's this beautiful portrait of this young corporal here. It's a testament to patriotism and bravery. As you probably know, most of the graves face with the head to the west and their feet to the east, to coincide with what Scripture says about bodies rising when Christ comes from the east. That's why you see a lot of these markers. I'm staring into the west, so it's not a good time of the day to try to shoot these. But there's one grave over here that kind of piqued my interest. So from afar, I thought this was a rifle, but it's actually a scroll with a crown on it for Palmetto. I'm always intrigued by these markers that have pictures on them from way back. I mean, this guy's been out here in the sun for well over 100 years. Now, this is a pretty cool marker of James Peterson, Hills Ferry Lodge, number 181. He died in 1900. AOUW. I think this is a pretty interesting place. I understand there's 11,000 graves and about 9,400 are filled already. Unfortunately, there's a lot of missing information as to where some of these graves are. There's an Alice Potter that was buried here, and it was kind of an interesting story. She left Utah and her husband, Henry, about 1863. She came out to California with her 3 kids to live in California with her sister. She allowed Henry, who had followed her to California in hopes of reuniting, to take their children back to Utah with their 2 oldest boys, Henry and Charles. Sometime later, Alice married a Benjamin Frank Potter. She died on December 2nd, 1867, while on a steamboat on the San Joaquin River from Sacramento. It's believed that she's interred here as a Mrs. A. Potter. We have no marker. It's always sad when that happens. I like to show markers. Now, I would like somebody to help me out here. I've seen these in different cemeteries. The globe on top, that probably has significance. But here's an Alfred Jones, native of Maine. He expired December 12th, 1893. He was 45. I often wondered what the significance of these globes are. So believe it or not, cemetery hunting is exhausting work. But I think I'm going to wrap up this visit to the Hills Ferry Cemetery. I hope that you enjoyed what we had to show you today. For the most part, I was successful. I had some help from the cemetery staff. They went home at 3. And would always love to hear what you thought of this video. Maybe you had some feedback about some of the people that we featured. And always give us a thumbs up. That helps. I've talked about the algorithm. YouTube will promote videos that people actively engage in. So by giving us a thumbs up, commenting, it helps. And someday we'd like to do this full time. I would like to quit my day job and do this full time so I can pump out more videos. So you can help me do that if you just interact with us. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. I love history and I hope you do too. So until next time, see you later.